Hey guys, your captain is back.
Hi.
Mario Kart DS is one of the best Mario Kart games in the whole franchise, and despite how it has been unusually trendy to call it overrated lately, it remains an iconic game that was a big part of many Zoomers' childhoods, including mine, and it also gave us unforgettable tracks like Waluigi Pinball, Airship Fortress, or Delfino Square. Its mission mode also left a huge impact on players who loved it and are all hoping for its return in a future title in the series, and for good reasons. It also introduced some core mechanics of the series, like the versus mode and especially the retro tracks. This is an excellent transition to introduce this video's topic. While the nitro tracks in Mario Kart DS are often seen as being among the best in the series, the retro tracks that come from previous installments in the Mario Kart series leave a lot to be desired, and I think most of you can agree with me on that. There are 5 circuit tracks, most of them being pretty forgettable. The last courses of each cup do not really fulfill their role of epic and memorable finale, and there are many track choices that were really weird, or not to say, totally stupid. But how to improve this? After all, the fact that Nintendo chose simple courses for this retro selection comes from the fact that the DS has limitations, which would be too important for Nintendo to bring back a track like Dino Jungle without downgrading it. So how to make the tracks ambitious enough for the player to really appreciate them without having the DS not being able to handle them at all? This is the question I asked myself and which I will answer in this video. Let's start with the Shell Cup. It's clearly the worst cup out of these 4, and one of the worst cups in all of Mario Kart. The reason is quite simple. 3 of the 4 tracks in this cup are just the starter courses of their respective games. The exception to this rule, Moo Farm, remains as simple as a track can be, since it's not much more than an oval with most.
But Boom, how can you not love these little cows?
Let's start the fixing. SNES Mario Circuit 1 is in its right place. Mario Kart DS is the first game to have the gimmick of retro cups going from shell to lining, so we have to start in a good way. And what could be more poetic for an introduction to something like that than to start with the very first track in the very first Mario Kart game? In addition, this track has a low difficulty level, so it's appropriate to be the first track in the Shell Cup. And now I'll clarify something. Unlike the developers who waited for Mario Kart 8 to give real glow-ups to its retro tracks, I'm going to start doing that from Mario Kart DS. After all, when your game is 3D, it's a shame to avoid any elevation changes in tracks.
But Boom, you don't understand. It adds a nostalgic charm to these tracks.
That's not wrong, but personally, I prefer to bring changes to them so that people who only played Super Mario Kart, for example, and are replaying its tracks on the DS, can see how Mario Kart has evolved since the Super Nintendo. Plus, I'd rather have a retro track that's actually fun to play rather than something that's just nostalgia pandering. So we can start by adding a bit more pipes to this track. It needs more real obstacles because as it is, it lacks some spice, like many Super Mario Kart tracks. Then, after the first turn, we could add a red arch in the shape of an M to represent Mario. After all, we're on his circuit track. In the middle of the course, we could enter the small tower that appears after finishing a level in the first Super Mario Bros. Games, to keep the nostalgic feeling that the new feature that is the selection of retro cups will inevitably bring us. For the shortcut, I would like it to be possible with a single mushroom, so we will add a little acceleration ramp in the middle to make it manageable. For the elevation changes, we could go up a little when we reach the tower, then go back down. And at the starting line, we could add some bleachers full of spectators. This track remains simple, but it already makes a much more interesting introduction than a simple rehash of this track just in 3D. Next up, Peach Beach. Honestly, This track was a perfect fit for the GCN slot of the Shell Cup. For starters, it's the second track in Mario Kart Double Dash's Mushroom Cup, which will make the DS Shell Cup feel more poetic. But above all, the atmosphere of this track fits perfectly with the second course of the first cup in a row. It has a chill and relaxing feel to it, giving it a calm before storm vibe so that a player can smoothly accommodate to the game's controls if they play the Shell Cup first, or in Mario Circuit 1 having no real obstacles except for the pipes, to Peach Beach, which is a track with cataquacks that are moving obstacles, split paths, and a little variety in the scenery. We don't even need to change this track. The only difference it would have with the Wii remake is simple. I would keep the pipe that gives us a double item box. Otherwise, Peach Beach is complex enough as it is, yet simple enough to be a Shell Cup track, unlike Luigi Circuit, which is way more repetitive and too simple to be anything else than a Shell Cup starter. On the other hand, this course doesn't really feel climactic enough to be an ending track, so I'm going to swap its slot with the N64 one. For the second half of the Shell Cup, I really don't know what Nintendo was thinking. We already had a starter course in the cup, but the developers decided that it wasn't enough, and we ended up with a cup with 3 courses just being the opening tracks of their respective games. I mentioned the GCN Luigi Circuit, but GBA Peach Circuit is no better. There is literally no reason for it to be in the retro selection compared to literally every other Mario Kart Super Circuit tracks. If you remember the placement of the previous 2 tracks in this cup in their respective debut games, and if you're familiar with the GBA tracks, you probably figured out which track I'm going to use to replace Peach Circuit. Yep, that's right. I'm going to choose Riverside Park. First of all, it was the 3rd track in Mario Kart Super Circuit's Mushroom Cup, and secondly, it would be a good way of following on from the previous 2 tracks. Mario Circuit 1 had a very simple theme that we often immediately associate with kart racing. It was a circuit track that really served to teach the player how to play the game. Peach Beach already had a more original theme and some split paths, but it's quite enough to get the player to get used to the game's controls. Riverside Park, on the other hand, has a rainforest theme. With the music being calm yet mysterious, it gives a much more adventurous feeling to the track. So it's a perfect way of letting the player know that from now on the game's going to get tougher, especially with the layout of this track being a bit trickier than the previous 2 courses. And by giving this track the glow up it needs in scenery, layout, and elevation, this impression will be enhanced. After the first turn, we enter a deep jungle. You'd have a few piranha plants spitting fireballs, a bit like on DS Mario Circuit. Then, after this section, you have this spot that will be elevated to become a cliff. The jump would have a much bigger impact this way. We keep the shortcut, but now it's done with a small ramp, and the bridge will slow you down unless you have a mushroom. If you don't take this shortcut, you enter a cave after the jump and end up in the area that converges between the shortcut and the normal path right after the next turn. This section would have a blue light for a slightly more mystical vibe, and the water could even be glowing. We get on a small path bordering the cave before climbing a small mountain surrounded by a waterfall. Eventually, you reach the top and jump off this mountain using an acceleration ramp to get to the big jump of the original track in a more impactful and climactic way. This track is rather simple, but with its trickier layout, more adventurous atmosphere, and jungle theme, it's way more interesting than Peach Circuit. I'm gonna be honest, I've been debating about what the last track of my Shell Cup would be. Ultimately, I decided to go with Katamari Desert. I've always found the original version of this track, as well as the Mario Kart 7 version of this track, to be mid and overrated. Yes, The Mario Kart 8 Deluxe version has improved so much that it has allowed this course to go from D tier to A tier thanks to clever use of the changing lap gimmick, but this is a gimmick that didn't exist back in Mario Kart DS.
That's Revamping. The train. How could you call this course D-tier when it has a train?
I'm probably going to surprise a lot of people, but I personally find that the train just makes the track worse and that it's one of the main flaws of this track. Having an obstacle that forces you to stop in a racing game just makes the track way too slow paced when it already feels really long. But on the other hand, in a game like Mario Kart DS, it would be nice to try and see how this track could improve. Plus, given that we're already going to have 2 beaches in this retro selection, my possible choices for the Shell Cup Ender were this or Moo Moo Farm, which is way too simple to be the final track of a cup. Calamari Desert, on the other hand, is not only a fan favorite, but the final track in Mario Kart 64's Mushroom Cup as well, which completes the poetic pattern of this new Shell Cup. And finally, it's cool to finish the first cup on the first track from this retro selection to be a true fan favorite, even if I personally find it overrated. Firstly, the road with the first 2 turns will be now part of a Wild West style town with various buildings. That doesn't affect the layout, but it does make the course more varied and interesting to look at, which is one of the things it needs the most. Next, the train will be smaller and faster, so if it gets in our way, we won't necessarily have to completely stop to let it pass, just maybe slow down a little, especially with Mario Kart DS's more responsive controls. After the first intersection between road and rail, we get to smaller oases. This changes the route a little bit and makes the track more challenging because this bridge has no guardrails at all and is a little tighter than the road in the rest of the track. As a result, it's harder to ride on this bridge without falling in the water. Then, towards the end of the track, quicksand is added. This makes the end way harder, as you have to be careful not to skim into the hole in the middle of the quicksand when driving through this section. This is how the course ends. These little changes in scenery and route make Calamari Desert so much varied, beautiful, and interesting to play. So, just by adding variety to the themes of the tracks and improving them, we already turned a horrible cup into a really solid one. But how can we improve the banana cup, and especially this shit? This cup is already a little better than the shell cup. At least it has varied themes, unlike the previous one which was full of circuits, but it still has a pocket full of problems. First off, Baby Park was probably the dumbest choice developers could have made for Mario Kart DS's retro selection. What makes this track fun in Double Dash and Mario Kart 8 is the general chaos, which was originally there thanks to the chaotic and brutal nature of the items from these games. But in Mario Kart DS, the items are much smaller and less powerful. The vehicles are smaller as well, which totally ruins Baby Park, as there is no chaos anymore in this version. Because of this, I'm gonna replace Baby Park with a track that will start off the Banana Cup instead of ending it. And this track is gonna be Mushroom Bridge. This track was originally the Leaf Cup Ender. The problem is, it's way too mundane and easy to be displayed in the retro selection. Originally, this track was the starter course of the Flower Cup in Mario Kart Double Dash, so it's logical to have it being the first track in the Banana Cup, given that it's rather easy, but already more complex than Mario Circuit 1 or Calamari Desert, with the traffic to dodge and plenty of split paths, at least in its original version. Because with the official remake of this course in Mario Kart DS, there's a catch. If you're familiar with both Double Dash and DS, you probably know that this course has been severely downgraded in Mario Kart DS. You can no longer go on the sidewalks, the Wiggle Bus and Mushroom cars have been removed, The pipe that you can take to get a double guiding box has also been removed, and the shortcut with the boost panel at the top of the bridge has been blocked off by walls. The limitations of the DS aren't even an excuse to butcher this track so badly, when this game has very ambitious nitro tracks like DS Bowser Castle, Airship Fortress, Waluigi Pinball, or TikTok Clock. So for my version of Mushroom Bridge, I'm keeping everything that's been removed for no valuable reason in this remake.
Wow, thanks, Captain Obvious.
Except that the pipe is going to work in a different way. Instead of taking you to an item box, it's going to take you to a different route. The tunnels would have more cars that are harder to avoid, so the new path I added, which has no cars, is easier but slower. At the second tunnel, there's also another path of the same kind. This course is a simple introduction to the banana cup, but by being more complex than what I put in the shell cup, it can be a good way to tell the player that things are going to be more interesting and challenging from now on. The first track in the banana cup was originally SNES Rice Ball Plains 1. The DS Mushroom Bridge is very simple, and the track that will represent Super Mario Kart in the new Banana Cup a little more complex. I've decided that this cup should be arranged in this new order: GameCube, Super Nintendo, Nintendo 64, and Game Boy Advance. Rice Ball Plains 1 won't be the second track for my new Banana Cup though. Sure, it makes sense to have this course theme early in the Banana Cup because with its grassy aesthetic, it remains quite simple, and with its mundane layout, it wouldn't really fit the two later cups, but the first track with this theme is a little too simplistic and mundane to go in any other cups than the Shell Cup, which can't have this track because Mario Circuit 1 was a necessity for the first retro track ever. So instead, I'll choose Rice Ball Plains 2. It's more complex, with tighter turns, the risk of falling into the water, some mud, and moles. It's the perfect SNES track for the Banana Cup, and at first, this area with two single turns becomes a small section above the trees with holes you should avoid. After two turns, you leave this section with an acceleration ramp. The next section is now harder, as the grassy area to the right of the track now has a pond, like this area to the left of the track, making avoiding falling into the water even more difficult now. Then, after these few turns, we enter a forest again. There's a big puddle of slippery mud and a few dry areas where you can control your vehicle a little more easily, a bit like on Choco Island 2 or Boston Building. We exit the forest, and the end of the course remains unchanged. This track, by becoming more complex than before, has gone from being a boring course to a course that can really be challenging and a suitable difficulty peak for the Banana Cup by adding a bigger risk of falling off the track, but also by making the scenery a little more varied with some forest section. On the other hand, Frappe Snowland is in its right place. This track has the perfect level of difficulty for the Banana Cup. It's a very clever way of gradually increasing the difficulty for this cup. You start with a track that remains simple, then one with a more complex layout, and for the third track, you take a course that not only has a more complex layout, but also ice physics, which means that the whole track will be much more slippery, making your vehicle harder to control. Also, it's a little varied in its layout without being too complex, so I can give it a glow up while keeping it limitation friendly. But the snow theme is way more unique than the previous themes we've seen so far. With the dark skybox, quiet music, and cold color palette, this track has such a unique atmosphere that allows it to be a good calm before the storm. It's such a unique and lovely atmosphere, and I can't get enough of it. So much so that I leave the first part of the track unchanged, as the atmosphere will be enough to have the player enjoy the track, despite its not having more obstacles than the occasional snowman. Plus, the combination of slippery ice and tight turns will also provide a good chance for the player, who must therefore come to the grips with the new type of handling due to the ice physics and the more complex layout with a higher number of tight turns than in the previous tracks. It's at the first third of the track that I'll start to revamp it. If you're familiar with Frappe Snow End, you know that at one point in the course, you jump over a small river. And that's how I came up with a really interesting idea. Instead of a small jump, you make the river bigger and turn this part into a whole ice block section. You jump several times on slippery blocks of ice with small ramps that take you just high enough to get to the next block of ice, adding a satisfying feeling to this section. After that, we get to the statue of Mario that's made of ice. The section will remain unchanged. The reason is simple. The high number of snowmen combined with the slippery ice makes this section relatively difficult in its own right. As a result, it's challenging enough for a banana cup track, but it's the end of the course that's going to need changes. The last section of this track is basically a nice canyon without a few obstacles and with a wide road which makes it a bit too easy. It's not bad, given that this part is inspired from a true natural monument in Japan, but this section could still use a little glow up to make it more visually appealing and also more challenging. So I came up with the idea of turning this section into an ice cave. The road is now tighter, which makes this section harder, because I removed the walls, which means falling off the track would be a bigger risk now. We then finished the lap. Frappe Snow End, despite its simple layout, was already a really interesting track, with a calm and gloomy atmosphere, a cold color palette, relaxing music, and relatively flat roads that brought a chill feeling to the track, which is something that few Mario Kart courses actually have. But with the changes I made, this course is also much more interesting in terms of layout, so at this point, it's a win-win. As I said, we are gonna end with the GBA track. I could have kept Bowser Castle 2, which was a very good choice for the second half of this cup, despite its being downgraded in the music and the skybox. But spoiler alert, I decided that there will be another similar flat Bowser Castle later in the retro selection, so I thought that keeping GBA Bowser Castle 2 in these circumstances would be too repetitive. So I chose another complex and unique track from Mario Kart Super Circuit's Flower Cup, Cheese Land. This is one of the most unique tracks in the entire series. It has a theme that's never reappeared again in the series, not even in the Mario Kart 8 remake. This track looks like a moon made entirely out of cheese, with a skybox that really looks like space.
R.I.P. vegan and lactose intolerance.
Similarly, the mice that serve as obstacles on this course never return in any Mario Kart track after this game. And a track with such a unique theme is a logical choice to cap off the Banana Cup. Plus, it's a fan favorite among many Super Circuit fans. Unlike the remake we got in Mario Kart 8's original DLC, we are keeping the space theme in my version. The first section would be Gunnar Cheese Meadow. We'd have the mice I mentioned earlier walking all over the place. Then, we'd start climbing higher and higher in the Lunar Cheese Canyon before entering a cheddar cave. Inside, you have to make several jumps from platform to platform while you avoid falling into the melted cheese. Then, you do a big jump to move from one cheese cave to the next. The second cheese cave has a tighter road, making it much harder to avoid driving off-road. We then return outside, and I'd had another idea to adapt all the crazy shortcuts you can take in the GBA tracks. This track has reduced gravity. It means you jump higher and fall more slowly. We now have lunar cheese craters that allow you to do big jumps, which opens up a great potential for lots of cool shortcuts, like on the semi-cheese wheel. Secondly, the main shortcut in the original version is now a large crater as well. It's accessible by drifting on the left when you jump out of the second cave, and the track itself ends with a jump onto a crater which is much bigger than all the others and makes you jump higher. This course would be a great conclusion to the Banana Cup, as it has a unique theme, a higher difficulty than the previous course, and obstacles that will make it much more complex. So with all that, we made the Banana Cup harder, more organic, and more memorable all at once, especially with a better ending track than Baby Park. Now, how can we fix the Leaf Cup? The Leaf Cup, in its original version, is already way better than the two previous cups. Its themes are a little more original and varied. We have one of the only circuit tracks to have a real theme, a beach, a course with an urban theme, and a track with mountainous and candy theme. But this cup still has some problems. First, Mushroom Bridge is the final track, and it's way too easy to close off the Leaf Cup when you remember that the layout would make it Shell Cup worthy. Secondly, the cup isn't very exciting. There aren't any choices that are really awful, unlike the three starter tracks in the Shell Cup or Baby Park in the Banana Cup, but there aren't any courses that are really memorable either, nor any true standouts. But how can this be improved? This may come as a surprise for you, but I'm gonna keep Cooper Beach too. It was a great choice for the Leaf Cup. It was a special cup track in Super Mario Kart because of the more janky controls, but since Mario Kart DS has more responsive controls, this course is already easier, so it makes sense for it to be the Leaf Cup opener instead. It may seem repetitive when Peach Beach is also in the game, but despite this, Cooper Beach 2 and Peach Beach have very different atmospheres. Peach Beach is more relaxing, with an atmosphere that inspires the idea of a vacation. Cooper Beach 2, on the other hand, has a slightly more wild feel, with vegetation everywhere and no sign of life we can see on the track except for Cheep Cheeps jumping into the water. And we don't even need to change this track that much, but we're going to improve the scenery. Those little green moss balls don't look very good on the DS, and I think I wasn't the only one who didn't understand what they were supposed to be when I played this course as a child.
I really want to make a sex joke right now.
So instead, why not turn it into a big wild jungle surrounded by the sandy road, with grass being the off-road? This would make the track look prettier and more lively as well. After the water potholes section, you go over a bridge and cross the jungle trees. As there are no walls on this bridge, it adds difficulty to the track, as you need to be careful not to fall off. I didn't make many changes to this track besides this one, but frankly, it doesn't need them that much. It just goes to show how Cooper Beach 2 is one of the better Super Mario Kart tracks. The second track in the Leaf Cup was originally Choco Mountain from Mario Kart 64, and once again, we're going to keep this track for our retro selection. It was a very good choice for the Leaf Cup. This track is harder, with a narrow road combined with some pretty tight turns. In Mario Kart DS, snaking on this track can be really hard, as it will not be uncommon to hit the walls due to the narrow road and this game's drifting system. As for the changes, I've made some so that the course really gives you the feeling of driving through a mountain made of chocolate. To start with, the first part of the track features a chocolate lake that you should avoid falling into, making the track harder. Then, after the tunnel, you climb higher and higher until you reach a mountain made entirely of white chocolate. In this section, the road is a little slippery, and in the middle of this part, I added a giant whirlpool of white chocolate. Just like the quicksand I added at the end of Calamari Desert, this whirlpool will suck you into it if you get too close to the hole in the middle of it. Then you get back down to the canyon, and this part will be a little faster because I've added a boost panel. Then, in the last section, we still have the falling boulders. However, the lake is now made of chocolate, and the sharp turn is now made on a rock path that passes over the lake. Stone pillars release the falling boulders onto the track. Finally, just before the two hills at the end, we have a section with mud that slows us down, a bit like in Boston Building, for example. Choco Mountain was already a perfect choice to be in this game's Leaf Cup, and with the improvements, we managed to make it even better. Yoshi's Circuit wasn't necessarily a bad choice for Mario Kart DS's retro selection. The problem is, you play it way too late in the game. If you're familiar with Mario Kart DS, you probably know that Yoshi's Circuit comes literally at the very end of the retro selection. It's the final track in the Lightning Cup, which is the equivalent for the slot reserved for a Rainbow Road in any nitro selection. So Yoshi Circuit makes for a very underwhelming finale, and I think it would make much more sense if this track was the third track of the cup. It's one of the hardest circuit tracks in the entire Mario Kart series. It's shaped like a Yoshi, so the turns are very tight and come one after the other in a fast-paced way. But at the same time, with the circuit theme and the happy-go-lucky music, it's not really a good finale for a cup. As a result, the third slot of the Reeve Cup is a perfect place for a Yoshi circuit. And as the original version of this track remains quite boring, we're going to give it a glow up too. For starters, the starting line will be on a beach, representing Yoshi's boot. The Yoshi Copter will also return in this remake, as well as the finger arches. As for the nose tunnel, we'll be adding two boost panels where the nostrils will be to make this part a little more interesting and fast-paced. Next, we'll bring back the red flower fields next to the road on Yoshi's neck. The tunnel shortcut also returns. At the tail, I added a very lush forest with two rivers. There are two little jumps over the rivers on Yoshi's tail. With all these changes, Yoshi's circuit has not only gotten back all the elements that made it popular in its original version, but with the glow up, it's more interesting to play. I'd also add a brighter color palette, just like in the Mario Kart 8 version, which would make this track much more pleasing on the eyes. Because in the first official versions, this track's color palette is a little too drab in my opinion. For the Reeve Cup's finale, I'm once again going to choose a track that was already in the original version of Mario Kart DS's retro track selection, Sky Garden. It was originally the third track in the Lightning Cup, and I think it was a good placement for this course, with its heavenly-like atmosphere, epic music, and engaging layout with twisty turns and opportunities to fall off. But I wanted to do something else with the Lightning Cup, and keeping Sky Garden in the slot wouldn't be a good idea because of this. As a result, I think this track will fit better at the end of the Reeve Cup. At this point, the player is slowly but surely approaching the end of the game if they're playing the Retro Cups after the Nitro Cups, and this track really gives you that feeling with its upbeat but emotional music and its layout that will leave you excited to discover the tracks in the final cup. As a result, I think Sky Garden also deserves its glow up. It's not necessarily the course that needs it the most, but it can make it more exciting, and at least we won't butcher the track layout like in the Mario Kart 8 Deluxe version.
Look how they massacred my boy.
After the first shortcut, I'm going to add a section that passes through celestial ruins to add a mystical theme to this course. There are also some vines on the ceiling of these ruins. In this section, there are holes in the ground, which makes the track harder as you now have to be careful not to fall off. You exit the ruins with a small jump ramp. Then, after the first bridge, you enter the garden part of this remake. I took inspiration from the general representation we have of the Garden of Eden, to have more of this heaven feeling in the track. There are turquoise ponds, a large tree, giant flowers, and a white stone wall. There's also a shortcut right here. Just before the end, there's a tunnel through a beanstalk, and throughout the race, you climb higher and higher until you get a big jump towards the finish line at the end. This track could really be an epic finale to the Reeve Cup, but it also leaves us with the impression that the Retro Cups aren't over yet and that we still have one final challenge to conquer. Perfect for the Reeve Cup ending track, as this cup is the penultimate cup in the Retro selection. By simply swapping out track orders and improving some courses, we made the Reeve Cup way better. At first, it was just a tolerable cup, but with our changes, it has become much more memorable and interesting. But the video is not over yet. We'll still need to improve the Lightning Cup, and especially make it a better finale. The Lightning Cup isn't a bad cup. Actually, it's the opposite. It's the best Retro Cup in Mario Kart DS, and the second best Lightning Cup, behind the Wii Lightning Cup. But there are a few choices that are a bit weird. First, while I think this track gets too much hate, Choco Islands 2 is a pretty dumb choice for this game. This track doesn't really go well with Mario Kart DS's drifting system, and it's still a little too easy to be in the Lightning Cup.
Plus, the chocolate looks like, you know what.
Next, We've already talked about it, but Yoshi's Circuit is a very underwhelming finale when you remember that the Grinding Cup will be the last cup some people will play. For my version, we're going to replace it with Mario Kart Double Dash's best track, and it'll be the first track of this cup instead, to hit 2 carts with 1 shell. It's Wario Colosseum.
Can you explain me how you would fit Wario Colosseum on a DS?
True, Wario Colosseum is one of the longest and most difficult courses in the entire series. As a result, it's normal to think that it's too big to be limitation friendly for the DS. But in the end, Wario Colosseum is pretty simple in literally everything that isn't about the layout. Behind this very complex layout lies a track with a rather simple scenery, without too many obstacles. The assets that are in this course are already present in other Mario Kart DS Nitro tracks, so I don't think Wario Colosseum would suffer from the DS's limitations. Not only that, but this track is one of the hardest courses in Mario Kart Double Dash, perfect for the Grinding Cup. On the other hand, I won't revamp it, because it's still a complex track, which especially thrives in having a complex layout and doesn't need too many modifications to be a really fun course in Mario Kart DS either, especially with snaking. On the other hand, Banshee Boardwalk is staying. It was literally the perfect choice to be in the second slot of the Grinding Cup. It's the last cup of the retro selection, and the last cup some players will play overall, so it makes sense to have some difficult and complex tracks here, with a more dangerous and intimidating atmosphere. In these regards, Banshee Boardwalk is the best of both worlds. First, it's one of the scariest tracks in the Mario Kart series. Admittedly, it's not the first time Nintendo made a track like that with a wooden bridge and a haunted atmosphere, but it's by far the best track with this gimmick. It's an improved, longer, and scarier version of tracks like Boo Lake or Ghost Valley. Then, it's a really hard track with a complex layout and many opportunities to fall in the water. And the best part? I don't have to change it that much to make it fun to play. First of all, I'm going to add more holes in the road, which will make it harder and more dangerous looking, ultimately making the track more challenging. Next, we enter a muddy island. You cross a swamp full of mud which slows you down, but 2 little dry parts allow you to ride normally in the middle of this area. Then, after the section at the chapel, the boardwalk stops and you find yourself on a rocky road. You make several small jumps before a tighter turn, and these are followed by a larger jump towards the finish line. This course would be perfect for the Grinding Cup. It's dangerous feeling, scary, and difficult. I wasn't really sure about what would be the penultimate course in the game. There were several contenders. Originally, in the second half of the Banana Cup, there was GBA Bowser Castle 2, which I removed and replaced with Cheese Land for a better finale. Now, you know the reason why I removed this track. I was a bit debating between the flat Bowser castles that were in the second half of their respective Mario Kart games, but I think GBA Bowser Castle 3 is the perfect choice. Bowser Castles 1 and 2 from the Super Mario Kart and Mario Kart Super Circuit games are way too easy to be the penultimate track in a Lightning Cup. SNES Bowser Castle 3 is a good contender, but I didn't choose it because there was one SNES track I wanted to prioritize for this cup. And Bowser Castle 4 from Mario Kart Super Circuit is so long, complete, and complex that it deserves to be in a Mario Kart game on a more powerful console, so its layout can unveil its full potential on a game like Mario Kart Wii or Mario Kart 8. As for the Bowser castles from Mario Kart 64 and Double Dash, they would suffer from the limitations of the DS, so I'd rather take GBA Bowser Castle 3, which wouldn't suffer at all from these limitations given that it's a flat track. This course begins without any notable changes, except for the removal of the walls to increase the risk of falling into the lava. After all, we're getting closer to the end of the retro selection. But after a while, we climb a road made of volcanic rocks. It's very narrow, a bit tilted, and has no walls, which makes this part way more difficult. The jump section isn't going to be changed, but the next sharp turn is going to have a good glow up. It will be on a grass road with curved edges and boost panels to make this turn harder. The next section consists of several jumps, all of which are a little dangerous, as you'll need to time them well to avoid hitting the rotating firebars that can make you fall into the lava. Finally, the road in this section is a bit broken. You go down to one iron platform to another until you reach the finish line. In the end, this course looked rather mundane at first, but with these modifications, it could really be an epic track for the second half of the Lightning Cup. Originally, the last track in the retro selection was Yoshi Circuit. As I said earlier, it's a very underwhelming finale when you take into account the fact that many will be playing the Lightning Cup last, and no doubt expecting something more climactic as a finale. I mean, there were 72 courses from which the developers could choose to have an epic final track for the first retro selection ever, but instead of more climactic tracks, they preferred to take a very simple circuit track. At least, it's challenging with a Yoshi shaped layout, but there is nothing special about the theme. It's just a Formula 1 style racing track. That's why I moved Yoshi Circuit to the Leaf Cup, and put the Lightning Cup slot occupied by a Mario Kart Double Dash course at the beginning rather than at the end, so that the slot reserved for the grand finale could have an SNES track. Pieced the puzzle yet? If you haven't, then the track I chose is SNES Choco Island 2! Yeah, Muppets and Raps, yeah, Choco Island 2, baby! No, but seriously, I chose SNES Rainbow Road. This really shouldn't come as a surprise. This was the very first Rainbow Road to be created for the Mario Kart series, so I think it would be the perfect finale to the franchise's very first retro selection. Then, with the slightly more slippery controls of the Mario Kart DS, this course could still be rather challenging, because since the developers waited until Mario Kart 7 to remake this track, its difficulty has been severely downgraded. As Mario Kart 7's controls are much simpler, this totally ruined the track. Super Mario Kart Rainbow Road has the identity of being a very, very difficult challenge, harder than anything you played before this track, and this would define the identity of most Rainbow Roads after this one. If you remove the difficulty, SNES Rainbow Road becomes way more boring and loses all its identity. As a result, Mario Kart 7's retro selection also ended with quite an underwhelming finale. So for my version in the Mario Kart DS retro selection, we're going to make SNES Rainbow Road as hard as possible so we can turn it into a worthy finale. First, the road is going to be a little slippery to make the track harder. It doesn't have a single wall, so it's perfect to make falling even easier. Then, throughout the race, we see fireworks. They represent the symbols of several characters that are playable in Mario Kart DS. We have Mario's M, Luigi's L, Wario's W, Waluigi's upside down L, Daisy's flower, Peach's crown, and the acronym DK, which is more commonly used to describe Donkey Kong.
Justice is kind.
The start of the track will be unchanged, but in the turns, I've cut some parts of the road to make them more difficult, and I've done this for every turn on the course. After the second turn, you have a choice between two rainbow bridges. Both are particularly winding and go in the opposite direction, eventually converging at the same point, and both paths have more or less the same pace. Then, there is a section where you fall from one colored cloud to another, which is cut in half by a sharp turn. After the cloud section, there are several jumps that take you higher and higher until the part where the road splits in two. After this part, we go even higher to end the race with a big jump. By ending the retro selection with a rainbow road and making it particularly difficult and punishing, we've been able to make Mario Kart DS a much more epic finale than Yoshi Circuit, which is a great way to end this video. It was long, but we did it. We were able to go through every problem in Mario Kart DS's retro selection and improve it considerably by varying the themes a little more, making the tracks harder, improving the tracks that needed a glow up, and giving a more organic order to the tracks in every cup. I really enjoyed making this video, so I think I'm going to do this for every retro selection in Mario Kart. Feel free to give me your fixed version of Mario Kart DS's retro selection in the comments. First, it will make me more valued by the algorithm, and secondly, it's always nice to know what you think. Thanks for watching this video, and see you next time!